Camp Alva, Oklahoma, August 14, 1943. Dr. Samuel Hartman knelt beside the loose floorboard in Barrack 7, his hands trembling. The afternoon heat pressed against the wooden walls like a living thing. Dust motes hung suspended in the shaft of light falling through the small window. Beneath the pried-up board in the 18-inch space between floor joists, 3 rats huddled in a nest of torn cloth and paper. They were alive. Malnourished, patchy-furred, but alive. Someone had been keeping them alive deliberately. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as shocking as I did researching it, hit that like button and subscribe to stay with us through these incredible true stories from history. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world. Your support helps us keep bringing these forgotten moments back to light. Hartman stared at those rats and understood immediately what they represented. The prisoners weren't collecting vermin for sport or entertainment. They were so hungry they'd turned to catching rats as emergency food. In that moment, staring into that dark space beneath the floorboards, Hartman realized everything he believed about running a humane detention facility was catastrophically, dangerously wrong. Samuel Hartman was 52 years old when Pearl Harbor pulled America into the war. He'd spent 26 years building a respected internal medicine practice on Chicago's North Side, serving the German-American neighborhoods where his fluent German and cultural understanding made patients comfortable. His parents had immigrated in 1889. He'd grown up speaking both languages, navigating both worlds. When America needed doctors after Pearl Harbor, Hartman volunteered despite his age. They didn't send him to field hospitals in Europe or aid stations in the Pacific. They sent him to Camp Alva, a newly constructed prisoner of war facility in northwest Oklahoma, designed to hold 5,000 German prisoners captured during the North Africa campaign. The camp sprawled across flat prairie grassland under skies so vast they made men feel small. Wooden barracks arranged in precise grid patterns. Wire fencing and guard towers marking the boundaries. The whole compound baking under Oklahoma's summer sun that turned metal surfaces untouchable by midday. Hartman's duties seemed straightforward. Maintain prisoner health, prevent disease outbreaks, ensure sanitation standards met Geneva Convention requirements. It was unglamorous work, far from the battlefield medicine he'd imagined when volunteering, but it was necessary. Epidemic disease in a POW camp could devastate both prisoners and guards, could create diplomatic incidents, could undermine America's claim to humane treatment of captured enemies. So he conducted his inspections methodically, every barrack, every mess hall, every latrine, checking for proper waste disposal, adequate ventilation, clean water sources, looking for early signs of illness-coughing patterns suggesting tuberculosis, skin conditions indicating nutritional deficiencies, behavioral changes hinting at mental deterioration. The prisoners learned to expect him. Dr. Hartman, the American who spoke German like their grandfathers, who asked about symptoms with genuine concern, who treated their medical complaints without prejudice or delay. Some viewed him with suspicion. He was still the enemy, still part of the machinery holding them captive. But most came to trust him, or at least accept his presence as one of the more benign aspects of camp life. He thought he understood the camp completely. He was wrong. That August afternoon, temperature at noon had reached 102 degrees. Hartman waited until 3 o'clock when the sun's angle provided some relief before beginning his rounds through the western section. Barrack 7 housed 60 prisoners, a mix of Wehrmacht enlisted men and Afrika Korps veterans captured during the Tunisia campaign. Hartman had inspected it twice before, found nothing concerning either time. Standard layout. Double-stacked bunks along both walls. A wood stove at the center for winter heating. Small windows providing minimal ventilation. Clean by POW standards. No obvious violations. He entered with 2 guards, Corporal Hayes from Texas and Private Johnson from Iowa, both young men assigned to escort duty because they showed no particular talent for anything else. The prisoners inside stood when Hartman entered. A gesture of respect or protocol or simply habit from military training. Hartman checked the bunks first, looking for bedbugs or lice. Nothing. He examined the floor for pooled water that might breed mosquitoes. Nothing. Opened the stove to ensure the flue wasn't blocked. Clean. He was preparing to sign off on the inspection when he noticed it. A loose floorboard near the back corner. Just one board, its nail heads slightly raised as if it had been pried up and replaced multiple times. In itself, this wasn't remarkable. Old buildings had loose boards. But something about the prisoner's body language made Hartman pause. They were watching him too carefully, tension radiating from their stillness, watching to see if he would notice, what he would do if he did. Hartman walked toward the loose board slowly, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. The prisoners didn't move, but their collective attention focused on him with an intensity that made the air feel charged. "Open it," Hartman said in German, pointing at the board. No one moved. I said, "Open it." A prisoner stepped forward, Obergefreiter Karl Schneider, 34 years old, captured at Kasserine Pass, leader of this particular barrack group. He knelt and pried up the board with careful hands, and there they were. The rats. Behind Hartman, Corporal Hayes made a disgusted sound. Jesus Christ, they're keeping rats under the floor. That's a health violation right there, Doc. But Hartman was already connecting the pieces, already understanding what the rats represented. He looked at Karl Schneider, whose expression showed resignation mixed with defiance. "How long?" Hartman asked quietly in German. 6 weeks. "Why?" Karl's jaw tightened. "Because we are hungry." The words landed like a physical blow. Hartman's hands went still. His clipboard hung forgotten at his side. For perhaps 10 seconds he simply stood there, processing the implication of what he had discovered. The prisoners at Camp Alva were so hungry they were catching and keeping rats as supplemental food. Hartman ordered everyone out except Karl Schneider. The other prisoners filed outside with obvious reluctance, leaving their spokesman to face consequences alone. The guards remained near the door, far enough to give privacy, close enough to intervene if necessary. "Sit down," Hartman said, gesturing to a bunk. Karl sat, his posture military straight despite the informal setting. Hartman remained standing, partly because sitting suggested comfort he didn't feel, partly because he needed the psychological distance that height provided. "Explain." Karl chose his words carefully, speaking German with the precision of someone addressing a superior officer. "The rations are insufficient. The camp provides what is mandated by Geneva Convention. We know this. We have no complaints about violations. But the quantities are calculated for average men doing average work. We are not average." "What do you mean?" "We work 10 hours daily in the fields." cotton picking, sugar beet harvesting, whatever the local farms need. The work is hard physical labor under this sun. Carl gestured toward the window where August heat shimmered across the compound. The rations are adequate for men sitting idle in a camp. They are not adequate for men doing agricultural labor. We are constantly hungry. We lose weight. Some men are developing symptoms of malnutrition. Hartman felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had approved those rations himself, calculating caloric needs based on standard military nutrition requirements. But Carl was right. The calculations assumed minimal physical activity, not 10 hours of farm labor in Oklahoma heat. "Why didn't you report this through official channels?" Hartman asked. "Request increased rations?" Carl's expression flickered with something like pity for Hartman's naivety. "We did, multiple times. The camp commander says the rations meet Geneva Convention standards. He says requests for additional food are attempts to exploit American generosity. He says German soldiers should be grateful to receive anything at all. So you caught rats. We supplement where possible. Rats, sometimes birds. Once a rabbit that wandered too close to the fence. We are not complaining about our treatment. We understand we are prisoners, but we are also human beings who need adequate food to survive the work we are required to perform." Hartman sat down slowly on the opposite bunk. His medical training was screaming at him. Malnutrition in a POW population meant disease susceptibility, reduced healing capacity, psychological deterioration. It meant he had failed in his fundamental duty to maintain prisoner health. "How many others?" he asked quietly. "How many other barracks are doing this?" "All of them," Carl said. "Everyone who works in the fields. We catch what we can. We share what we catch. It is necessary." Hartman spent 4 hours conducting medical exams that should have happened weeks earlier. He weighed prisoners, measured body composition, and noted signs of nutritional collapse, brittle nails, thinning hair, failing teeth. The quiet evidence of bodies consuming themselves. The results were damning. Prisoners had lost 15 to 20 pounds since arriving at Camp Alva, some far more. Body mass indexes had fallen into chronic malnutrition. Early scurvy appeared despite minimal vegetables. Others showed vitamin B deficiency, nerve damage, confusion, the first signs of beriberi. They were starving, slowly, invisibly, unmistakably. That night Hartman compiled his report. His usually precise handwriting trembled. He had believed he ran a humane medical program, that American POW treatment proved moral superiority. But he had been measuring the wrong things, watching for epidemics while missing starvation unfolding under his authority. The rats under the floorboards confirmed his failure. The next morning Hartman confronted Major William Thornton, Camp Alva's rigid, regulation-bound commander. Thornton reviewed the report without visible concern. "The rations meet Geneva Convention standards," Thornton said. "They're verified and compliant. They're working 10-hour days," Hartman replied. "Those rations are for sedentary prisoners. That gap is causing malnutrition. They're prisoners of war. They're human beings." Thornton's voice cooled. "Farm contracts required labor," he explained. "Production mattered. Work hours would not be reduced because prisoners claimed hunger." "They're not complaining," Hartman said. "They're catching rats to survive." Thornton stiffened. "Rats? I found them under the floorboards kept as emergency food." Previous ration requests were denied, so the prisoners adapted. That's a health violation. They should be punished. We should fix the cause, Hartman cut in. Starving men shouldn't be punished for trying to live. Thornton ended the meeting with a promise to consider it. Hartman left furious. He respected the chain of command, but men were suffering while his medical judgment was ignored. He spent the next week assembling proof: photographs of protruding ribs and hollow faces, weight loss charts across the camp, testimony of constant hunger. Then he contacted the International Red Cross. Dr. Heinrich Müller arrived on August 28, 1943. After a 6-hour inspection, his verdict was precise and damning. The rations meet technical standards, Müller said, but not the labor demands. This creates slow starvation. It violates the spirit of the Geneva Convention. Müller began writing his report. How long before the report produces changes, Hartman asked. Officially, perhaps weeks. Bureaucracy moves slowly. Müller looked up from his notes. Unofficially, I suggest you make Major Thornton understand that this report will reflect poorly on his command. Career officers care deeply about how their facilities are evaluated in international reviews. Sometimes the threat of documentation proves more effective than the documentation itself. Hartman returned to Major Thornton's office that evening with Dr. Muller's preliminary findings. Thornton read them silently, his face darkening with each paragraph. "This is a political attack on my command," Thornton said finally. "This is an accurate assessment of conditions you've allowed to develop," Hartman replied. "Dr. Müller is one of the most respected neutrals in POW evaluation. His reports carry significant weight with both American authorities and international organizations. If he files this formally, your career will be significantly damaged. Are you threatening me, Doctor? I'm explaining consequences. You have an opportunity to address this problem before the formal report is filed. Increase rations for prisoners performing agricultural labor. Reduce work hours. Implement some combination of both. Make the changes necessary to ensure prisoners receive adequate nutrition for the work they're performing." Thornton was silent for a long moment, internal calculation visible in his expression. Finally, "What exactly are you recommending?" Hartman was ready. He presented a clear proposal: increased calories for work details, added protein, reduced labor during extreme heat, and regular medical monitoring, each point supported by data on caloric expenditure and nutrition. "This will cost money," Thornton said. "Less than treating mass malnutrition," Hartman replied. "Less than an international scandal. Less than explaining a failing Red Cross evaluation to Army Command." Thornton read in silence, jaw tight. Efficiency had come at the expense of humanity. "I'll approve it," he said finally. 30 days. If costs rise or productivity falls, we reassess." "Agreed," Hartman said. "With weigh-ins and medical tracking. If prisoners aren't gaining weight, rations increase." Thornton nodded. "Draft the policy." The new ration plan began September 1st, 1943. Agricultural laborers received extra bread, larger protein portions, and afternoon snacks, about 800 additional calories daily. For starving men, it was transformative. Within weeks, Hartman saw steady weight gain, improved dental health, thicker hair, and fading deficiency symptoms. Morale rose as well. The constant hunger eased, replaced by something unfamiliar, the sense that someone cared. 3 weeks later, Carl Schneider quietly thanked him for noticing what others missed, for understanding what the rats had meant, for treating them as human beings. "This changes how we see America," Carl said. "We were taught strength meant hardness. But this shows strength can mean care even for enemies." The word stayed with Hartman. Camp medicine was no longer just administration. It was a front line of values, testing whether America's principles could survive practice. Dr. Miller's report, filed in late September, reached Army Command in Washington by mid-October. The response was swift and comprehensive. New nutritional standards were established for all POW camps employing prisoners in agricultural labor standards that required caloric intake matched to work performed, with regular medical monitoring to ensure adequacy. Camp commanders across the country received detailed instructions about implementing these standards. Some complied readily, having already recognized the problem. Others resisted, viewing the new requirements as unnecessary burden. But the policy changes were mandatory, backed by both Army Command and International Red Cross oversight. By December 1943, malnutrition rates among working POW populations had dropped significantly. Medical reports from camps nationwide showed improved prisoner health, reduced illness rates, better outcomes when injuries occurred. The changes cost more increased food purchases, additional medical monitoring, more administrative overhead, but they produced a population of prisoners who survived their detention in significantly better condition. Major Thornton never acknowledged the policy changes as anything beyond bureaucratic adjustment. He implemented them efficiently, maintained meticulous records proving compliance, made no public statements suggesting Camp Alva had ever operated below acceptable standards. His career continued without dramatic setback, though his command evaluations noted adequate but uninspired administration. Hartman continued his work at Camp Alva through the war's end. He conducted his inspections with increased vigilance, looking not just for obvious violations but for subtle signs that regulations were inadequate for actual circumstances. He became known among POW medical staff as a doctor who prioritized practical outcomes over technical compliance, who understood that protecting prisoner health sometimes required challenging the regulations designed to protect prisoner health. In his journal, Hartman wrote about the rats beneath the floorboards with uneasy clarity. He had conducted inspections for weeks, checking protocols and supplies, convinced he was thorough. But he realized he had examined surfaces while missing what lay underneath. The prisoners were starving slowly and invisibly. The rats were evidence he could not dismiss proof that something was wrong, despite technical compliance with regulations. Camp Alva closed in 1946. Prisoners were repatriated to a devastated Germany, the barracks dismantled, the land reclaimed. Only photographs and records remained to show that 5,000 men had waited there for years. Carl Schneider returned to Hamburg to find his home destroyed and his family displaced. He rebuilt his life as a mechanic. In letters to fellow former prisoners, he rarely complained about detention, but often reflected on what Camp Alva taught him. "We were enemies," he wrote in 1950. "We deserved nothing beyond survival. Yet when the American doctor realized we were hungry, he fought to change it, not because rules required it, but because he believed we deserved food." Hartman returned to his Chicago practice and spoke little of his POW service. Still, the policy changes he initiated remained in place and shaped post-war standards. When the Geneva Conventions were revised in 1954, Camp Alva was cited as evidence that rations must reflect actual labor, not theoretical minimums. Hartman died in 1967. His obituary mentioned his POW service only briefly. But Schneider wrote to the Tribune, Hartman had saved lives by noticing hunger where reports said none existed, and by choosing reality over paperwork. The rats were never supposed to be there. Their presence revealed the truth, and Hartman's decision to listen to what they showed changed lives and policy long after the floorboards were sealed.